Oh, the guy who had trouble with me over there.
So we have more than 5 people, so it's a success already. Thank you for coming.
I think we're just waiting for 1 or 2 folks to come in from the loo. We go on cue. Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming along. Happy New Year to everyone first. What a difference 24 hours makes. I mean, a couple of days ago, you were anxious about whether anyone would come along, but so was I. Spring has arrived. And we've got a fantastic evening ahead of us. Those of you who came early would have pre-talk entertainment would have noticed the increasing levels of anxiety among some of us and the obstacles being set up here as the technology seemed to fail. So we keep our fingers crossed that we've solved with them, that the images will stay with us for the evening, because there are some fantastic pictures. I had a bit of a preview, so we're in for a treat. So we've got a really good evening ahead of us. I'm very, very grateful that Sam's given up the evening. His life, he has a very, very busy life. He's hectic, he's all over the place with lunchbox boys and hotels to manage and so on. So really grateful that you've given up the time to come and share your experiences with us tonight. And so we're in for a real treat. So I won't delay things any longer. Pass on to Sam, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much, folks.
Yeah, just all off whenever you're ready. Perfect. It's 4 a.m. on the 18th of May, 2023. The sun is just creeping over the horizon. It's minus 57 degrees and the wind is gusting at 70 miles per hour. I've just made it past the infamous Hillary Step and I'm making my final few steps to the summit of the world's highest mountain. And then, all of a sudden, it's done. I'm standing on top of the world at 8,848 meters with no one else around other than my two Sherpas. Despite the conditions, you would think that this would be a moment of triumph and celebration, but actually what I feel is total relief because I'm physically and emotionally exhausted. There are countless times over the last few weeks when I could have so easily hopped on one of the regular helicopters that serves Everest Base Camp, as many of my group and other climbers did. This story is not so much about climbing Everest, but about what I like to call the iceberg effect. Summiting the mountain was a mere 1% of the journey, and most of what led me here lies beneath the surface. And tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey that began long before touching down in Nepal, a journey that equipped me to say no to the helicopter. Now, I could stand here and tell you that I had a tough upbringing, but the truth is I didn't. I grew up with a supportive network of friends, teachers, and family in a fantastic place. This is my first day at Alvey Primary School in Kincraig at the age of 5. There were 28 kids in the whole school and just 3 in my year group. I started life with a healthy dose of good fortune, and I fully recognize that that is something that not everyone is lucky enough to enjoy. If truth be told, I lived my early years in something of a bubble, a comfortable bubble. Part of that bubble was the freedom to explore the outdoors, and from a very early age, I was climbing trees, building dams in the river, making tree houses, and getting lost in the forest. It was a fantastic childhood. But looking back, there were also some valuable life lessons taking shape. Fitness, balance, strength, these are all things that start developing at an early age. And so too, independence, resilience, and calculated risk. Some young people are desperate to get away from rural life, but for me, the wilds of the Cairngorms gave me everything I needed and wanted. So, these were the cards I was dealt, cards of good fortune, good health, and happiness. Having said this, there was a big part of me that was very conscious of these circumstances, and ultimately, I wanted to prove people wrong. The stereotype of being an only child is that everything is gifted to you, and this is something myself and my parents really wanted to avoid. I wanted to make sure I was always the hardest worker in the room and write my own stories. If anything, we went the opposite way. What shapes who we are? Well, I was very driven from an early age. Part of that came from my parents, both hardworking people. Part of it came from watching others, seeing successful people succeed, and as I mentioned before, proving people wrong. On 25th of May in 2005, Liverpool lifted the Champions League trophy in one of the greatest sporting comebacks of all time. I remember watching the final and seeing the halftime scoreline of 3-0 and thinking there is no way back. But what I have since learnt is that you can never, ever give up. There is always a way back. At the age of 10, I was so inspired. One of my first goals in life was to become this man, Steven Gerrard. He inspired the comeback in Istanbul and grew up in a working class environment in Liverpool. And along with a generous helping of natural talent, simply worked harder than those around him to become one of the world's best footballers. I became a massive Liverpool fan, and this is my first trip to see Stevie G in action. I even managed to recruit a few fans along the way. This obsession with football continued, and at the age of 11, I began to take it more seriously. I had a trial at Inverness Cally Thistle, and this opened up a new world for me, taking me out of the safety bubble of Alvey Primary and exposing me to new people and new experiences. Travelling around the country, playing a game every Sunday against the likes of Celtic and Rangers, big, physical, competitive teams with thousands of girls and guys to choose from, I grew up fast and quickly understood the level of competitiveness that exists in sport and in life as well. Basically, I was too nice. I had to grow up fast and become more of a savage. I learned people skills, communication skills, and eventually I became team captain, which in turn made me think about how to be a good leader, both on and off the pitch. I recognized discipline as an important factor and started to train my mind to notice the little details. I remember the coaches used to comment on how I always tucked my shirt in and had my polo shirt buttoned up. It was simple stuff, but it was all about standards. Small details lead to big results. Speak to any successful person or team and they'll tell you the exact same thing. My years with Cali taught me these lessons and planted the seeds of discipline in my mind, making some great friends and having a laugh along the way. Whilst football was my passion, I also had an interest in wildlife and nature from an early age. Inspired by my dad, who spent 25 years working as a wildlife photographer, it was only natural that I developed a passion for wildlife photography and received a prize at the BBC Young Wildlife Photographer of the Year Awards at the Natural History Museum in London. Why am I telling you this? Well, number one, I never get the chance to show anyone my photos. But number two, photography was another piece of the jigsaw, learning patience and determination to get the results required. This was the image that was awarded, ironically not taken in Scandinavia or the Arctic, but just 3 miles from home at Loch-Inch. I loved going out exploring the local forests and taking photos, but I was very fortunate enough to go on adventures further afield. From brown bears in Finland to polar bears in the Arctic. When I saw my dad selling his images, I thought I could do the same. I set up a website with my growing collection of wildlife photos. I drew up a marketing plan, and at the age of 14, I thought I was going to take over the wildlife photography space. And a year later, I'd sold fuck all. My first business, or as I like to call it, a lesson. I'd also got the bug for travel and adventure, something that has stayed with me ever since. At 16, I had exams coming up, not that academic work was ever high on my priority list. I was still traveling back and forth for football, and I was still kidding myself that my photography business was going to make me rich. Basically, I was spinning too many plates, something I still do to this day. I had to streamline what I was doing back at Cali. Some players were starting to leave, and the urge to be different started to bite. And despite being offered a new contract, I took the plunge to switch sports and developed an obsession for competing at the Olympic Games, and more specifically, the Winter Olympic Games. So, what is biathlon? Well, in my opinion, it's the most extreme sport in the world.
Biathlon is skiing.
Biathlon is shooting.
On the range, we need to be fast and precise. Every miss costs time.
On the track, we need to show power if we want to succeed.
Biathlon is strength.
Biathlon is focus.
It's never just one or the other.
It's the combination
that makes the champion.
This is Scott Dixon, one of my best friends, and I've known Scott and his family all my life. This is Scott's dad, Mike Dixon, MBE, obviously lives in Boat of Garton, Great Britain's only 6-time Winter Olympian in a sport called biathlon. Mike became my next Steven Gerrard. I talk about drains and radiators, and drains are the people you want to avoid at all costs. They're the people that are going to tell you can't achieve anything. They're going to be negative. They sap all your energy, drain all your energy. Avoid the drains at all costs. On the other hand, you have radiators, and Mike was a radiator. They focus on solutions over problems. They're positive. They make you feel like you can take on the world. And this was Mike in a nutshell. His mindset was on a whole new level, and I have a lot to thank him for. As you can see, biathlon is one of the toughest sports in the world. Its physical and mental demands are off the scale. It's minus 20 degrees. All your muscles are on fire. Your heart and lungs are in overdrive. And then you have to have the focus and the discipline to slow everything down on the range and hit the targets. But despite the challenges, I dreamed every day of competing at the Olympics and managed to get a place on Team GB at the Youth Olympics in Romania, as well as the Youth World Champs in Kazakhstan. I moved to Norway to fully commit to my dream, learn the language, and traveled to events in Belarus, Russia, Scandinavia, and all across Europe. This was the first time I'd lived away from home for any period, and I was well outside my comfort zone, with only one choice: sink or swim. The problem with Norwegian biathletes is that, annoyingly, they're the best in the world, and our under-budgeted, under-resourced and under-talented team was very much looked down upon. It was a little bit like the Eddie the Eagle effect. But I rolled my sleeves up, and over time I hope I gained some respect when they realised I wasn't actually that bad, albeit nowhere near the levels that they were. There would be times when you'd had a bad race and the stewards would be packing up the course. You'd cross the finish line having given everything, still minutes behind the leader, feeling like everyone was laughing at you, only to do it all again the following weekend. Racing taught me real resilience, the resilience to continually ignore those failures and keep going. I was based in Lillehammer with access to hundreds of kilometers of fresh tracks. It was an incredible experience, and I was very, very fortunate and grateful, but my home will always be in Scotland. I just missed out on the Olympics, and having spent years raising funds, relying on family and sponsors, trying to compete no longer made logistical and financial sense. It was time to move on to the next chapter and take control of my life. Many of the lessons that I have learned throughout my childhood and from sport, I've taken into business. I started my company almost 10 years ago, Fitness at 58 Degrees, created a Facebook page, and with a lot of enthusiasm, I was up and running. Little did I know the amount of challenges I would face over the coming years, but the amazing journey I would also go on. Almost 10 years on, looking like I've been to the trenches many times, but always making progress. Personal training became boot camps. Boot camps became weekends. There's someone in the audience that supported me from the start. Thank you, Wendy. Weekends in Scotland became weekends in Iceland and Portugal, and I'm very grateful to have welcomed guests from all over the world. But again, we go back to that iceberg effect. The first few retreats I put up did not sell at all, but success to me is going from one failure to another without any loss of enthusiasm. And that was me. I knew I could make it happen. It was just a question of when. There's a lesson there. Don't wait for things to happen. Make them happen. A few years on, thankfully, things took off, and I've been lucky enough to deliver some retreats here in the Cairns, on Ben Nevis, always leading from the front. And my experience in biathlon has taken me back to Scandinavia, working with the Royal Gurkhas, Special Forces. Here I am dressed as Michelin Man. And that iceberg effect is very, very clear. This is a Lot More Lit Running Festival, which some of you may have heard of, happened just last week. And almost 650 people signed up. Now, the first one I did of this was 7 years ago. 12 people showed up. I had a little camp chair. I forgot to time them all, and it was a complete disaster. But with perseverance and determination, we're now at a point where it's an incredibly busy and popular event. And if you never try, you will never know. Take the jump. Leaving your comfort zone behind will test you. But it's far more dangerous to stay inside your comfort zone. I took the jump and ended up meeting and working with some incredible individuals, from Special Forces operators to Olympic gold medalists, to Strictly Come Dancing finalists, to heavyweight champions of the world, and even Love Islanders. But I was always looking forward, and I'm always like that, looking for what was next. And what was next for me was the Lunchbox Boys. And someone said to me when we were thinking of this concept, you can't call it the Lunchbox Boys, you're going to sound like strippers. And I thought that's actually a good point. But as I was driving home, I thought there's something in that. There's something memorable about that. It's a little bit cheeky, a little bit quirky, and people will remember it. So we went with the name. I teamed up with one of my best friends, Dougal Cameron, and we did not have a clue. I cannot make that any clearer. If people saw the behind the scenes, they would cringe. I cringe myself. But we were up and running, delivering lunches to offices. And again, with a lot of hard work, an extreme amount of hard work, 6-7 years down the line, we're working at some incredible venues, meeting some cool people along the way, working with some great brands, and having a laugh along the way. Everything I'd done before Lunchbox Boys was all on my own, and my favorite part of the whole operation is being part of a team. When you're in a team, the highs are as high as it gets, and the lows are as low as it gets, but you're all on the roller coaster together. There's something special about that. Now, I haven't told you this to brag or be arrogant in any way, because that is the complete opposite of what I am. But it's just proving the point that if you match your words with your actions, then you can make things happen. It doesn't have to be starting a business. It can be doing 5K a day, doing 10K steps a day, drinking enough water, whatever your goals are. If you match your words with your actions, progress will happen. Why have I told you this when all you want to hear about is Everest? Well, my childhood and my sport played a huge role in giving me the physical and mental attributes I needed to even consider climbing the highest mountain in the world. But it was business that gave me the key from a financial perspective. So now it's time for the main event. When did the Everest idea turn from a dream to a reality? Has anyone seen the TV show SAS Who Dares Wins on Channel 4? Well, I was a huge fan of the show, but without a tragic story, there was no chance of taking part in the show. I had the business, the connections and locations to put something really special together, which was roughly based on the show, taking people beyond their physical and mental limits. I teamed up with Everest summiteer and ex-Special Forces operator Jay Morton to deliver this experience, and I'm lucky enough to now call Jay a good friend. And after he told me all about Everest and how he'd served in the military with Nimsdai Perja, a superhuman Gurkha who is the modern-day superstar of high-altitude mountaineering, watch 14 Peaks on Netflix if you haven't already, the match had been lit. It was time to execute. So this is how the Everest journey began. But first of all, I'm going to show you the video from the SAS Challenge, which was my favorite event I've ever delivered. Contains very strong language. Move! Let's go! You're 16, why do you look like a fucking witness? Fucking overtaking the 18! Let's go! All the way! Come on! Hands up, fucking game! How many more are there? How many more? Because we won't good enough staff. I think it's fucking over, don't you? I think it's fucking ended. It's fucking not, it's just started. Apologies for the language. Anyone fancy it? Okay, so it was that Special Forces mindset that kind of stuck with me, that feeling that we can keep going and going and going, and there doesn't need to be an end point, and building that mentality to achieve great things or really challenging things. So, who has heard of Everest? Well, basically, a lot of people, when you speak about Everest or say the word Everest, they'll say, oh yeah, my mate's been there. And basically what they mean is they've been to base camp. And base camp in itself is a massive challenge and a huge achievement, but the two can't be compared. You know, they can't be put in the same sentence in terms of base camp and going to the summit. It's two different worlds. And obviously I've spent a lot of time in the Cairngorms and Ben Nevis and things, but I'm relatively inexperienced in terms of climbing. So there had to be something that could fill a gap, something between deciding I was going to try and summit Everest and actually going to there on the expedition. So back in November, before I went, so November 2022, I headed out to Nepal for the first time ever on one of Nimsdai's expeditions. And this is Lukla Airport. I don't know if anybody has heard or seen of it. I did not enjoy landing there. It's one of the world's most dangerous airports, and I hated every minute of that 12-minute flight. But I flew into Lukla, and this was the first taste of Nepal. Incredible views, very, very basic tea houses. This is Namche Bazaar, sort of the last kind of frontier before you head higher up and into the more remote areas, respecting the religion along the way and getting to know the Sherpas and getting to know everything that Nepal entails. And a lot of people ask, how do you carry a lot of the kit? And this was one of the ways, using the yaks. I'm not sure how I felt about it. I felt quite guilty a lot of the time, but they're used to it, and it was a massive help to us. And this is just a sense between Lukla and base camp of some of the views that you enjoy along the way. So pretty special. And I started making my way up, higher up, and eventually made it to Labuche base camp. Labuche was the mountain I had decided to climb to warm up for Everest. So this is a 6,100 meter peak. So high enough, higher than Kilimanjaro, but nowhere near Everest. And we arrived at Labuche base camp. This was my first sense of high altitude mountaineering, camping out in the cold and everything that goes with that. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, the following day, we set off on our summit push. And this is me halfway up. The sun's just starting to creep over the mountains, as you can see. And I might look happy here, but I have severe altitude sickness at this point. I wanted to sleep more than anything. I was dizzy. I was seeing double. Honestly, I shouldn't have been there looking back. I should have gone back down, but I didn't. So there we go. But I was in a really, really rough place here. And I said to my Sherpa, I said, please, please, please just let me shut my eyes for 20 minutes. I feel so tired. I just need to recharge quickly. And he said, if you go to sleep, you won't wake up. So I thought, roger that, I'll probably keep going. So I set off, and using my experiences from the biathlon, from the football, all the hard stuff that I'd done before, grit and determination, I was extremely low on energy, gritted the teeth and started continuing on my summit push. You can see the inexperienced one, the experienced climbers with the light backpacks ahead of me, and then the absolute whopper that's got no experience with 20 kilos in his rucksack. So I made life hard for myself. But with a lot of hard work, I made it to the summit. And again, at this point, I am not a happy bunny. You can see me at the end, and everyone's like, Sam, stand up, let's get a photo. And I'm like, if I stand up, I'm falling off. I was so dizzy. But we did it with the help of my Sherpas. It was a rough ride, but we got the job done. And just as we left at 1 o'clock on that morning, someone that I'd shared a room with throughout the whole journey, all the way up to Labuche base camp, so the tents, the tea houses, a guy called Andy, a Glaswegian guy with 2 kids, 29 years old. And I became really good friends with him on the trip. And as we left for the summit push, Andy said to the Sherpas, he said, something doesn't feel right, guys. I'm not going to go. I'm going to turn back. This was 5 minutes into the summit push. And the Sherpas were saying, you know, Andy, come on, just get yourself into it. Keep going. You can do it. And he said, no, 100%, something doesn't feel right. So he turned back. And then I was climbing for the next 14 hours to get up and down, and finally made it back to Labuche base camp. And when I got back, I was obviously exhausted, but I went in to check on Andy and said, mate, everything okay? Let me know if you need anything at all. And I was in the tent next to him. Obviously, I was totally knackered at this point. So I went to sleep in my tent. And the next thing I hear is someone waking me up at 5 o'clock. And they say, Sam, dinner's ready. And I said, no problem, guys, I'll be there. And then they said, Andy, dinner's ready. And there was no response. They said, Andy, dinner's ready. And no response again. Now, I just thought he might be sleeping, and it was all good. And then I could just hear the panic in the voices of the Sherpas start to develop. And I, obviously, when I noticed that, I jumped out my tent and went into his, and I found him unconscious. And it was the first time ever in a real life situation doing CPR for real. And it was a scary experience. And at 5,000 meters, delivering CPR is pretty brutal. I did CPR for about 20 minutes to the point where it started to become detrimental to myself. And unfortunately, I couldn't bring him back, and he passed away. And I checked his Garmin, and he was actually dead 20 minutes before we even got to him. So a real sad story, and it was a crazy experience. And we literally, that night, it was a very somber night in camp, as you can imagine, and we put him in a sleeping bag. And this helicopter came in to pick him up, and that was it. Andy was dead, that was it. And that is the fragility of the mountains. When that helicopter flew off, I never heard from his family, nothing. So a crazy experience. And the mountains had chewed me up and spat me back out. And our expedition ended early, so I'd achieved my goal, but I jumped straight on a helicopter and came home as soon as I can. But we need the mountains. The mountains don't need us. And I've never felt so vulnerable and exposed. But I knew there was more to come, and the mission was just getting started. And a lot of people said to me, well, surely you're not going to go for Everest, having just been through what you've been through with Andy. And I said, of course I am. If anything, it makes me want to do it even more for him. And the mission was set, the goal was set. So between that November and March, preparation was absolutely key. I knew for a fact I would be the least experienced on the trip and with the least technical skills, but I wanted to ensure I would be the strongest physically and mentally. So my training was designed around that. I had to make sure I was in good condition. So there's a lot of testing and preparation involved, losing as much weight as I could to be as light as I could to get up the mountains, getting used to wearing a mask in extreme weather. That's Melabucal. And the determination was so high, the motivation was so high, the discipline needed to match that. And I had to take 100% accountability and responsibility for what I was about to do and make sure I was as prepared as I could. In order to do what others can't, you need to be prepared to do what others won't. And just like that, March came around and it was time to go. It took me, or I say me, it took Louise, thank you so much, a long time to source all the kit and get everything ready. But that was me set and ready to go. And just like that, I was off. The support team had wished their goodbyes. And this is my amazing mum who's in the audience tonight. And she thought, this is at Inverness Airport, she thought she'd see me in 2.5 months. And actually she saw me 72 hours later. Now, I could do a whole talk on how I lost my passport on this plane. But I'm not going to. All I'm going to say is the chances of me actually getting to Nepal, I genuinely believe, were less than 1%. And I don't know if anyone's seen Top Gun Maverick and how they need 2 miracles, but this was miracle number 1 on the mission. My passport was left on that plane, and a long, long story and a lot of stress and money later, I finally managed to get my hands on the passport, and I was ready to go, and I was back in the game. So a week later, a week after my group had already set off on their expedition, I headed back to Lukla. Landing in Lukla, the mission was back on, and I was already drained from the whole passport experience. And I just at this point had to lock in and focus and switch on to what was about to go down. So I tried to switch my mind on and get ready for war. The Sherpas always smiling, incredible people. Nothing up there could be done without them. I'll just give you a little insight into what camp life was like.
Night 1, Labuche base camp. Fucking freezing. But morale is high. Morale is high.
Morale wasn't high. But I had to adapt my social skills as well. You know, all of the people with the company that I was with were 45 plus Americans, you know, and I was the youngest there by far. So I felt lonely in a lot of ways. The second time between Lukla and Everest Base Camp, I completed a second successful summit of Le Boucher. And this time it went a lot better. No altitude sickness, all went smooth. And that actually gave me a lot of confidence that I could continue on and keep pushing, because if that didn't go to plan, I'm not sure that I would have even attempted Everest. Heading back down Le Boucher, 6,100 meter peak, and it was time to head into Everest Base Camp. On the day we moved into base camp, I felt really, really rubbish, really lethargic, and I was barely moving, but I just put it down to tiredness. And finally, we made it to base camp. So this was the setup. That's my tent on the bottom right corner. That was my home for 2 months. And obviously, it looks like an incredible place, but it's pretty tough out there. Setting up my camp, and it doesn't always look like that. There's a lot of slow days when the weather's not so good, and you're literally waiting for weather windows and killing so much time. However, they definitely made us pay for it, but the company that I went with were incredible, and they made every single effort to make sure we were as comfortable as possible. A barista on site on Everest Base Camp, that's pretty incredible. But they really, really did look after us as best they can. So this was the mission ahead. Obviously, I was at base camp at the bottom there, and I wanted to get to the summit. But you've got a good chance of dying anyway. But if you go from base camp straight to the summit, you're definitely going to die. Okay, so you've got to do rotations and let your body acclimatize to the altitude. So you go camp 1 back, 2 back, 3 back, and then to the summit. So you've already climbed the mountain and been through the famous Khumbu icefall 3 times before you go on your summit push. And on the night that I left for base camp, I said to myself out loud, I said, something doesn't feel right. But I said, it's now or never. I'm already so behind the group. If I don't go now, then there's no chance of completing this mission. So I have to get this done. I have to leave. I was in catch-up mode. So that night at 1 o'clock, we set off in the Khumbu icefall, which is a horrendous place. And it's like an icy maze that you'll never get out of, with ice blocks as high as the ceiling here, ladders like this, where if you make one mistake, it's game over. And that was me making my way through the icefall in the early hours. Now, this first rotation, I had zero energy. And when I talk about zero energy, I mean like the tank was not even empty, it was below empty. And I had to keep stopping every 10 meters. And my Sherpa said to me, Sam, if you keep stopping like this, we risk avalanches, we risk, something happening. And honestly, the altitude plays tricks with you. And I felt so shit that I was happy for that at that moment. I was honestly like, okay, I don't care. I need to keep stopping. And if an avalanche comes, it comes. It will be doing me a favor. That's how little energy and how rubbish I felt. It's supposed to take about 6 or 7 hours to get from base camp to camp 1, and it took me 15 hours. So it was pretty brutal. I spent 48 hours at camp 1, laid on my back, full altitude sickness, and finally made it back down to base camp. Very sunburned, as you can see, clearly Scottish, looking pretty worse for wear. And when I got back, I was pretty broken and I was on the verge of giving up. And I went to the medical team. I was like, why do I feel like this? I know I'm not going to feel 100% at altitude, but I feel so terrible. And they confirmed I had severe tonsillitis. So that was the next setback. And at this stage now, I'm on the verge of giving up. I am pretty much there. I'm pretty much ready to give up. The whole expedition is in question. And my guide, the lead guide on the team, suggested I go back to Lukla for 10 days. So I'd already missed a week of acclimatization. I'd done 1 rotation, and then I had to go back down to 2,000 meters for 10 days to sit in that house there and just wait for time to go by. And all that doubt and all that sort of fear creeps in, and it's so easy to let it dominate your mind. And I lay there for 10 days, questioning everything. Why am I here? What is the point? But as I said, Steven Gerrard, there's always a way back. 10 days later, I wouldn't say I was feeling back to 100%, but I was definitely better. And I jumped on a helicopter back into base camp. Ready to resume the mission again. And I find the whole thing so hard. I was so lonely. I was so vulnerable. I would write notes on my phone when I was at the higher up camps with no signal. Okay, the Wi-Fi was $500 for 5 gigabytes. So getting in touch with home was tough. But I would write notes, and this is one of the notes that I wrote on my phone. Use this sadness as power and fuel. What you've put everyone through. Everyone's behind you. What if? What if you can pull off a miracle and reach the top of the highest mountain in the world? You've come so far, have to dig deep, deeper than ever before to make this happen. It's going to be an emotional roller coaster, but visualize the finish point. 3 weeks of suffering for a lifetime of accomplishment. No one will ever be able to take this away from you. Have the cry, pick your head up, and get ready for fucking war. What would Foxy say? Everyone wants you to do this, so go and do it for them. You can push to levels no one else can. Take the positives in every day. You've made it through yet another day. The pain of 3 more weeks of suffering or the pain of a lifetime of regret. Your choice. Don't waste this opportunity. This is temporary. It will end.
Hey guys, how you doing? I've kind of stopped doing it. Well, I stopped doing these video updates a long time ago, but I'm at Camp 2 on Mount Everest, which is, yeah, so emotional all the time. But yeah, it's crazy to say. Missing home so much, but hanging in there. Full summit suit on. It's absolutely freezing. The air as well. There's no oxygen. But yeah, I wouldn't say enjoying it, but just taking it day by day. Yeah, I'm gonna make myself cry again, so I'm gonna go. But all good. Tomorrow we go to Camp 3. Then we've got to go all the way back down again. But yeah, thinking of you all, missing you all.
I know I look like a minion, by the way, but the day after I headed to Camp 3 and I was on the Lhotse face, which some of you will know, a lot of rock fall on there, a lot of issues. And I was halfway up the Lhotse face and I had severe chest pains. And I turned around at that point, so I didn't complete my mission of getting to Camp 3. And that only heightened the constant fear and doubt of like, why is everything going so wrong? And can I actually make this happen? I since realized that was a panic attack. You know, I had businesses happening, you know, working whilst I was away. I had this massive scale challenge ahead of me, and it was just a panic attack. I also almost got severe frostbite on this Lhotse face to the point where I had to take my boots and my socks off on pretty much a vertical face attached to the rope and put my feet in my Sherpa's armpits to warm them up. And it's the closest I've ever been to like losing my toes. It was pretty bad. But I could stand here and talk to you about the scale of Everest, but it's hard for me to articulate that. So hopefully this next video will help. So after all the setbacks and everything I'd been through, I was ready for the final rotation. And I'd not come this far to only go this far. I had to make it a certainty that no matter what, I was going to get this done. And I had to take the emotion out of it. And I made it like a mission, like an operation. Zero doubt in my mind. I was packed, ready to leave. I couldn't let that doubt from all the setbacks creep in. I had to be completely confident and sure that I was going to get the job done. This is the puja ceremony, which is a religious ceremony that the Sherpas do to grant you safe passage of the mountains. And that is our camp, and that is the Khumbu Icefall on the left there. I mean, who looks at that and think it looks like a good place to walk through? Positivity flowing through my veins at this point. I thought, I've been through all of these setbacks and I was ready for war. I set off on my first rotation of my summit push from base camp to camp 1, and then I went up to camp 2. So this is what it looks like at camp 2. It's a pretty rugged lifestyle up there, not much happening, and you have to stay strong mentally at all times. Now, this video is a little hint of what we had at base camp most days.
Make it all the way?
Avalanches constantly, and between, you can hear them as well. It's like massive crunching noises and explosions around you. And between camp 2 and camp 3, I heard a massive explosion on my summit push. And I thought, shit, that sounds like a big one. And it was an avalanche, and it was basically coming straight for us. And the noises just got louder, and you could see it literally in front coming towards us. And basically I said to the Sherpas, I said, guys, what are we going to do? Like, why aren't we running? And they said, Sam, this is it. Just accept it. Say your thanks, say your prayers. It's game over. And I thought, fuck that. I'm running. I was like, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die trying to survive. And with the big boots that you can see there, with my crampons, it was like something out of a movie. I was legging it as fast as I could back down the Lhotse face. And I could see the view in front of me, and then all of a sudden, everything just stopped. And I thought, oh, shit, it's caught up with me. I'm dead. It's game over. But thankfully for me, it was the very remnants and the very end of the avalanche. And it started to clear, and I thought, I was checking myself. I was like, oh my God, I'm still alive. This is amazing. And that high quickly went to a low, because the Sherpas that told me not to run, they both rolled past me and both passed away. So it's pretty brutal up there. Obviously, I'm glad I ran, but those highs to those lows can happen really quick. But we made it to camp 3, which is pretty much vertical. The Sherpas smiling all the way. Like I said, nothing is possible without them. And finally, we made it to the death zone. I had to block out all the noise and the negativity. You can hear people in their tents asking about the weather, doubting themselves, whether they should go to the summit or not from camp 4. So I had to block all of that out and stay in my lane. I didn't have time to be worrying about anyone else other than the mission ahead of me. At this point, it's sink or swim, it's do or die. there is a lot on the line, and not just the summit or not summiting. This is a pretty regular sight, sadly, on Everest, especially between Camp 4 and the summit. And sometimes you have to risk everything for a reward that will stay with you forever. A few hours into the night, around 8 o'clock, again, low energy, not feeling great. It was just about putting one foot in front of the other, and I set off on my summit push between Camp 4 and the summit. Small steps, big breaths, and honestly, you feel so vulnerable. I didn't see a single soul other than me and my Sherpas between leaving Camp 4 and getting to the summit. And those doubts start to creep in, but you have to keep the belief. Now, the weather forecast was totally wrong. So I explained at the start how it's really high winds and really cold temperatures. And essentially 10 of the people that summited from my company, on my summit day, 7 of them lost their fingers. So due to frostbite. I have all my digits, but I kept my mitts on the whole time. And it meant the Sherpas taking photos for me. And I had 2 fruit pastels for 48 hours. So my whole 48-hour summit push was fueled by 2 fruit pastels that I managed to get from my mitts to my jacket, because everything was frozen. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of what it's like on the summit, bearing in mind it was a lot darker and a lot higher winds.
Try to radio you from the summit, okay? I'll be on the summit in 20 minutes. I've been with Dawa all night. I've had problems with my feet. I just had to move, man. Otherwise, I would have gotten frostbite.
You can see the fragility of where you are, and making one wrong move can ultimately not end very well. Every step is difficult, even with the oxygen. You just have to keep fighting. But this is pretty good weather. My weather was completely different, and I was just focused on staying alive more than anything. But as the sun started to rise over the mountains, a lot of people ask what it's like, and it's like being in a plane, but you're not in the plane. Breathing heavy all the time. And that's what it looks like from the top of the world. But I completed my summit push and I got the job done. Everything I'd worked for, all the setbacks, I managed to make it to the summit. As you can see, my oxygen mask is frozen. Everything's frozen. It was pretty severe. But no plan survives first contact, and we made it work. Me and my 2 Sherpas, who I started the expedition with, made it to the top of the world. As you can see, they took the photos. The wind was so high that they were never going to be the best of quality. So I got one a little bit further down, and I'd completed my mission. But what is really key is that you don't switch off. And most people that do die on the way back down, because they've exerted all their physical and emotional energy on getting to the summit. But getting down is a whole different story. I was at the summit and I had to get down to Camp 2. So I'd already done a summit push of 12 hours, and then I had 16 hours from the summit back down to Camp 2. So it's a long way still to go, and you can never ever switch off. On my way back down, there was a Chinese girl, and obviously we're clipped into ropes at all times, but you literally got people falling asleep on the way back down because they're so exhausted. And she thought she was clipped in, and she wasn't. And she started to slide on her bum and gathered more and more speed. And she was screaming, and she was about 50 meters ahead of me. And basically, she literally flew off the mountain. And that was it. So you cannot switch off at any time.
Hi Mom, hi Dad. Hope everything's good. Just summited Everest with these legends. And,
it's been a hard day when they look like that.
On our way back down there, this is the view.
This is a little bit further down when the weather was better.
It's a bit surreal, really, but thanks for your support. Love you lots, and hopefully see you on Saturday.
So a pretty surreal feeling, but I kept the focus. I was exhausted. My Sherpas were exhausted. My final time through the ice fall, looking very weathered by this point. I hope I'm never back there again. And a lot of people ask me when the happiest moment was, and the happiest moment for me wasn't the summit, it was the final 100 meters into base camp. I ran, I cried, I screamed, I shouted, pure elation. And that's the feeling that I remember most. And that's the feeling that I'm not sure I'll ever have again. As you can see, I was wasting no time. My bags were packed. I was on the summit on the Thursday. I got back to base camp on the Saturday, and the helicopter was booked that Saturday afternoon. So I got back to base camp at 9, and the heli was booked for 2. And ironically, it was when I decided to say yes to the helicopter, I thought I'd had my 9 lives, but it had one final surprise for me. I jumped on the heli out of base camp, and shortly after, the clouds started to come in, and pretty much a storm came in, and this is what it looked like. Thunder and lightning storm on my way back to Kathmandu, and I was honestly trying to turn my phone on and make it work to tell my mum, this is it. Surely this is it now. I've had all my chances. We are going to get struck by some lightning. The pilot was just flying on sight. The helicopter was all over the shop, and I was like, this is it. And unbelievably, I don't know how he managed to get us back to Kathmandu, and I didn't even leave the airport. I jumped on the next available flight back home. And eventually, I made it home to the 2 people that have been there from the start and supported me no matter what. You can see my face, although not frostbitten, a lot of windburn, and I lost 16 kilos in 2 months. So I was looking pretty ill. But you go back to that iceberg effect. The day after, I jumped on a ferry to Stornoway, and I was serving people their breakfast through catering, asking if they want ketchup or brown sauce with their breakfast roll. So that's kind of my life in a nutshell. But I'm going to wrap up soon. But before I leave you, I have one final video for you and a few final thoughts to share and some questions at the end if anyone would like. Never take life for granted. In the blink of an eye, everything can change. Appreciate the small things in life and live the most fulfilling life you possibly can. No regrets. Nothing is impossible. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, guys. Do we have a few? I know I've taken up your evening. I really appreciate you all coming to support me. Does anybody have, we'll just do like 5 minutes of questions if anybody has. It's always awkward if no one does have any. Yes, sir.
Your first summit, preparatory summit, when you had altitude sickness, what do you think about the possibility of it becoming even more severe the next time?
A lot of fear. I mean, it's hard for me to even explain how rough I felt. Like your energy is just nothing. You just got nothing. And everything's dizzy. It's like it's like most people will be drunk, but it's not a good drunk. Just fear and just pure hope that it would go okay the second time around. Yeah, so I do think there is a connection between once you've been there, your body is more acclimatized and ready for the next time around.
Some people, it's the other way.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing with altitude sickness. Smokers deal with altitude better. Some people that are really fit, it can affect you. It's just so random. There's no science to it. It affects everyone in different ways. So that's why it's such a risk. Anybody else?
Would you do it again?
No. That's the easiest question. I think the way I describe it is once in a lifetime, no regrets. I'll have it with me forever, but never again. Too expensive. Yeah, too expensive. Yeah. Yes. Ladies first. Go on.
This is a predictable question for me. Sponsorship. Did I see branding and things? Sponsorship for it?
Yes, I did. So Randox Health, who I work with, they gave me, I'll be transparent with you, $5,000, which was unbelievable and a huge support. But it sounds really shallow to say, but it was like a drop in the ocean in terms of the total cost. It was pretty much self-funded through loans and everything like that. It's very complicated, but ultimately, if people weren't getting married, then I wouldn't have gone up. That's the best way to describe it. Yeah. Yes.
A lot of reports recently show these big long lines of folk on the summit range, and that can hold people up in a pretty serious consequence. I didn't get the impression you were caught in that.
Yeah, so no, I really wasn't caught in it too much, and it's all to do with the weather windows. So the picture that the famous one that you've probably seen on BBC, and that was one weather window available, and everyone went at the same time. So yeah, you might get queues, but you've just got to think positive and think everyone's there for the same reason. And what people don't see as well is everyone's moving so slowly. You're literally like that. Like that's the pace you're moving at. So you're not really getting held up that much. But yeah, it is an issue, and Everest is becoming more and more popular, and I'm glad I did it when I did. But yeah, it's all to do with the weather and things. But yeah, you can have issues with crowds, but I feel like any popular place has that. But yeah, it's something to watch out for and a bit of a concern. Yeah, but I personally didn't have any issues. Yeah. Anybody else?
Can I just ask about the company you went with, because it's all commercial sense now, isn't it?
Yes.
Because it's fixed road. I mean, a couple of questions came to mind. One was just a bit about how you chose which company to go with, and was it a Nepalese company? And also, I noticed when clipping into the ropes, there's sections where there's lots of ropes there. Is it confusing to know which rope to clip into? Because there'll be ropes from years gone by, and some of them, those won't be safe ropes.
Yeah, no, a lot, like some of the ropes aren't attached to anything, and you think they think they are. Yeah. Honestly, you're like, oh, that looks good, and then, no, hang on a minute, that's going up there. So, yes, it is, yeah, and the rope fixing team do an amazing job. Without them, you'd be no chance. I went with a company called Climbing the Seven Summits, who are an American company, probably one of the most expensive companies you could go for, but I thought if I'm doing it, then I'm doing it. And I'm going to give myself every chance, given my age, given how inexperienced I am. But I went with Nimsdai. Some of you might have heard about Nimsdai. I went with his company, and it felt pretty unorganized. And obviously the Andy thing happened as well. So I decided to go with Climbing the Seven Summits. But all sense goes out the window. The money thing. They said to me, do you want extra oxygen? And I'm like, well, we've not got enough oxygen. and they said, right, you can get 3 extra bottles for 10 grand. And I'm like, well, I might need them then, you know, and in my head, I'm giving myself every opportunity. So I paid the 10 grand to get 3 bottles, and I didn't use any of them, you know, so I felt that that was a bit of a sort of money-making move. But the company themselves were incredible, and yeah, definitely.
Sorry, there were some more hands.
Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
What's your next mission?
I thought, yeah, you might ask that. I don't think you'll see me on a big mountain again. I think that's safe to say after that. But I'd like to do an Ironman, and I would just honestly just like to live a bit of a simple life for a few years. You know, just work on my businesses and just be quite low key. Because it's been 10 years of living life at like full throttle. You know. So I'm exhausted. I'm only 29. So yeah, Ironman is the next challenge, but there probably won't be another mountain. I think maybe K2, maybe. We'll see. Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
Sorry, go on, sir.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me most from your talk was that, I guess, death was around every corner, and I wondered whether that was something you were prepared for before you went. Did you have discussions with family and friends that could happen to you?
Yeah, I think you know the risk going into it, and I know this sounds really weird, but that almost excited me. And the people ask why. It's it's because it's such an extreme challenge that I wanted to do it. But yeah, you get the forms, the insurance forms, and you basically tick in a box whether you want your body brought back or not. And it's 25 grand, and then if you want your finger, it's 500 pound, and you know, literally you're ticking boxes for your different limbs. So I knew there's a huge amount of risk involved, but I also knew the benefits. But yeah, you do lose a lot of sense up there, like that just becomes your world. And like I probably would, being honest with you, say I was willing to die trying. It just becomes all that matters, even though now I'm like, it didn't really matter in the big perspective of things. But yeah, the talk's not so much about Everest. It's about how fragile life is, and how whatever our different goals are and ambitions, and whatever makes us happy, to pursue them and just to have no regrets. Yeah. Final couple of questions.
Are your parents still talking to you?
Well, my mum's here tonight, so I must have done an all right job. But yeah, I put them through the mill big time. And there was moments like the company were posting on social media who had summited, and I was supposed to be in wave 1, but I got delayed at camp 2. So I ended up in wave 2, but they didn't know that. So they'd seen the name of summits, and I wasn't there. And then for 2 or 3 days, they were like, well, what's happened to him? Yeah. So I do feel very guilty, but they did support me.
The modern heated mitts and socks and
jackets
you get now.
Yeah.
Can you utilise them up there, or are they just too bulky?
No, so you can. I had everything wired up, but the problem I had, it was so cold and the weather was so bad. I too much information, but I literally pissed myself. Like I couldn't do anything with my hands, and my phone was underneath in the pocket, in my inner pockets, and everything was wired up, but I couldn't get to the thing to turn it on. So I spent like quite a bit of money on the fancy hand warmers and foot warmers, and they didn't get used, not once. So yeah. Anybody else?
Do they clear up the bodies, or are they still up there?
They're still up there. Yeah, they're still up there. It's quite scary, and you just kind of have to sort of block it out, and think, well, that could be me next, but it's really sad. But yeah, between Camp 4 and the summit, that's where the most are. There are quite a few rescues from Camp 4 down, but the helis can only go to Camp 2. That's as high as they can go. So yeah, it's pretty severe up there, and a lot of people are like, does it live up to the hype and documentaries? And I honestly would say it's like a real life documentary. It lives up to the hype completely. So need to take care. Yeah.
Great, John.
Yeah. So you mentioned, was it 7 out of 10 folk who lost fingers? And I've never been anywhere like that, but reading books, people seem to almost consider things like a worthwhile sacrifice, a mindset thing. You have to reconcile that before you go, that I might lose my fingers. Yeah, I think you're just aware of all the risks. I definitely wasn't prepared to lose mine. But yeah, I mean, literally they obviously took gloves off at the summit, and our weather was so bad, so they're taking photos. The hands cooled down mega quick. And then when we got back to Camp 2, I was just exhausted. I was just eating some food, and I just looked to the side, and all their fingers were black. And I was just like,
okay, just I'll leave them to it. But they all reported that they couldn't do anything. It was just, yeah, that was it. So yeah, a lot of risk, and some people in the audience might think it's worth it and some won't, and that's okay. People will have different opinions. But for me, I think the reward was worth it. Yeah.
Last question, do you ever think, what if I signed for Kelly Thistle?
Yeah, I do actually. The guy I captained, Ryan Christie, he's playing in the Premier League for Bournemouth, and but yeah, I'm happy washing dishes. Yeah. No, but if anyone has any other questions, come chat to me after. But I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic evening. So thank you. Pretty exhausting evening for us all. Can I just thank you all again for coming, and just remind you that we're back again in 2 weeks' time. Our next talk is with David Belharry from the John Muir Trust. So that should be a fascinating evening, listening to the history and the work and the impact of the John Muir Trust that it has across Scotland and England, in fact, and Ireland, I believe. So, you know, I'm sure that will be a worthwhile evening, following on in the theme that we've had tonight again with mountains and outdoors and conservation and so forth. So hopefully I'll see many of you back here, if not all of you back here, in a fortnight. And can I also put in a plug for the Rotary Club event with Cameron McNeish, which there's some leaflets outside if you want to pick one up on the way out. On the 1st of February, he's coming back here. He was here before Christmas, as you remember, with one of our previous talks. But he's back in February to give an exclusive talk. Inflation has kicked in because they're charging £8 for him. So I think there's an altitude supplement we should have charged tonight.
But most of the people I paid to be here, to be fair.
Sorry?
There is gin tasting.
There is gin tasting, that's true. That's at no extra charge.
Sorry to let you down, yeah.
That's on the 1st of February, not tonight. Okay, so thanks again, Sam. It's been a terrific evening, some really amazing photography and images, and a really terrific story to tell. And only 29. Wow. Yeah, groans from the audience. No, thanks a lot. It's been a terrific evening. Thank you all very much for coming. Hopefully we'll see you again in a fortnight for the John Muir Trust. If you have mugs, great if you could take them out. And if you feel inclined to stack a few chairs, if you stack them straight on to the